Have you ever wondered why you suddenly wake up between 3 and 5 in the morning? No alarm, no noise, just you and the silence? It's not random. It's not meaningless. What if I told you those hours hold a message? A moment meant only for you. Not to scroll, not to stress, but to awaken to something deeper. Something sacred. The hours between 3 and 5 in the morning are not simply an inconvenient interruption to one's sleep. They are, in their quiet and often unsettling stillness, a veil drawn back, a doorway into something deeper than mere wakefulness. The modern mind, trained to find explanations in biology, caffeine, stress, or restlessness, is quick to dismiss such hours as meaningless. Yet those who have lived long enough or felt deeply enough come to recognize a strange pattern. The soul often chooses the silence of early morning to whisper. And sometimes it is not the soul alone that stirs. It is something else, something beyond reason, reaching toward you in the dark. This is not a time of noise or certainty. It is a time when the world is at its most hushed, when even the city pauses in its breath. The artificial noise of schedules and obligations has not yet awoken, and the demands of the day remain unborn. In that window, something sacred and strange hovers in the air. It is not the same as daytime thought. The light of reason gives way to the half-lit shapes of intuition and memory, of longing and truth. It is here that your heart begins to say things the mind refused to listen to during the day. It is here that the soul, like a long-neglected friend, clears its throat and asks, "Are you listening now?" To wake at this hour without knowing why is to stand at the edge of a mystery. You have not been invited into activity but into awareness. This is the hour where dreams still linger and the self is not yet armored by duty. There is something honest in the rawness of these minutes. They do not flatter or disguise. You are who you are at 3:30 a.m. Not who the world thinks you are, not who you pretend to be, but who you truly are when stripped of performance and momentum. And perhaps this is precisely why it is difficult to face, because truth lives here. It is not polished, it is not convenient, it is simply real. There are traditions, ancient and wise, that do not treat these early hours as accidents of insomnia, but as appointments, sacred callings to awaken and listen, not just to the body, but to the divine. They hold that during this time, the veil between the seen and unseen is thinner, the spiritual more audible. You are not merely disturbed from sleep, you are being summoned, even if you cannot say by whom. And in that summoning, there is no pressure to perform. There is only invitation to sit, to breathe, to be present with what rises in you. Many resist this hour because it demands vulnerability. The darkness does not distract. There are no tasks to complete, no audience to impress, no role to fill. You are left with yourself. But perhaps that is the point. In the loud daylight, you are constantly being drawn outward. But at 3 a.m., the world gives you no such option. You must turn inward, and if you dare, upward. You must face the grief you've buried, the fear you've avoided, the hope you've been too cautious to name. These are not tasks of the logical mind. They are burdens and blessings of the soul. To wake between 3 and 5 in the morning is to enter a room without walls, where the usual rules do not apply. Here, you are not defined by your schedule or your success. You are not measured by your followers, your income, or your title. You are simply human, infinite, fragile, and yet mysteriously invited into communion with something infinite. You may feel lonely in that moment, but you are not alone. You may feel restless, But what stirs you may be the very thing that saves you. There is a peculiar clarity that belongs only to the early morning hours, when the world lies in slumber and the air is still. The mind, freed from the weight of obligation and external noise, becomes something altogether different. It is not the same mind that rushes through emails or navigates crowded streets. It is gentler, quieter, and strangely honest. Between 3 and 5 in the morning, thought no longer competes with the busyness of the day. What rises to the surface is not clutter, but essence, not distraction, but insight. And often what is revealed is what has been waiting all along to be seen. In daylight, we are fragmented. We play roles, jump from task to task, and hold ourselves to impossible standards. We live by the clock, measured by its ticking demands. Even our silence is filled with the noise of our thoughts trying to catch up to themselves. But in the hush of early morning, time loosens its grip. It does not rush. It does not ask anything of you in that soft, grey space between dreams and waking. Your mind returns to a more natural state, one that listens instead of performs. You are not thinking to solve, to impress, to plan. You are thinking simply to know. There is something revelatory about the mind at that hour. It reaches depths that are rarely touched during the day. Hidden desires, forgotten fears, unspoken hopes, they rise like soft ripples on still water. You begin to see yourself more clearly, not as you wish to be, but as you truly are. The self you encounter is not draped in titles or responsibilities. It is not dressed for others' approval. It is bare, and perhaps for that very reason, beautiful. You are no longer trying to be someone. You are simply being. This clarity does not often shout. It does not arrive like a thunderclap of revelation. It emerges slowly, tenderly, like dawn pressing its fingers against a dark window. A sudden understanding, a quiet conviction, a truth you could not face yesterday, but feel ready to now. These things rise not from force, but from presence. And that is the secret. This hour demands nothing but your presence. You do not need to be brilliant or brave or busy. You need only to be still enough to notice what has already been given. Some of the most honest conversations you will ever have with yourself happen not in crisis, but in quiet. And the quietest hour of the day is also the most transparent. It has a way of showing you what matters and what does not. The worry that consumed you yesterday shrinks under the light of perspective. The resentment you held on to begins to soften. The idea you were afraid to try starts to make sense. This is not magic, though it may feel like it. It is the soul finally speaking without interruption. The clarity of these hours is not just for introspection. It can also be deeply creative. Writers, artists, thinkers, all speak of inspiration arriving uninvited in the dead of night. It's not because night itself holds power, but because the quiet allows the imagination to roam freely. When the mind is not caged by deadlines or watched by expectation, it begins to unfold. The spark you've been chasing all day may come when you least expect it, not with effort, but with surrender. To wake between 3 and 5 is to wake into a space where you are permitted to feel deeply, to think without filter, and to remember truths you've been too busy to carry. The clarity of that time is not just mental, it is spiritual. It reconnects you to what is real, to what lasts, and to what has quietly been waiting beneath the noise. When you wake in the early hours, between 3 and 5, there is a temptation that immediately calls for your attention, the urge to fix, to distract, to escape. The moment your eyes open and you become aware of the hour, your instinct may be to grab your phone, check the time, scroll aimlessly, or worry about the lost rest you are convinced you need. But there is another way to approach this fragile space between night and morning. One that does not seek to control the moment, but to dwell within it. The choice to begin with stillness rather than struggle is small in gesture, but vast in consequence. To be awake when the world sleeps is disorienting, and the body naturally wishes to return to its rhythm. But what if you were not disturbed at all? What if you were awakened not by noise or restlessness, but by invitation? This is not the kind of invitation that arrives with fanfare or clarity. It whispers, it nudges. It does not demand your attention, but makes itself available if you choose to notice. In that moment, before the world rushes in, you have a decision. Will you reach for the nearest distraction to dull the discomfort of awareness, or will you sit with the silence and let it speak? Stillness is not the absence of motion. It is the presence of attention. It is the decision to remain, to breathe, to inhabit the moment fully. It does not require a script or a posture. It simply asks that you resist the instinct to flee. In the day, stillness is a rare commodity. We speak of needing time, but even when we find it, we often fill it. We are conditioned to believe that any pause is unproductive unless it produces results. But in these hours, before productivity takes hold, you are offered something different. The chance to remember yourself. Not as a worker, a parent, a performer, a fixer, but simply as a being. If you meet the moment with panic, you will miss its subtle depth. You will turn it into a problem to be solved, a mistake to be corrected, a threat to your day ahead. But if you meet it with stillness, it may become something else entirely, a sacred chamber of the soul that opens only in darkness, a conversation that can only begin when everything else is quiet, a space where nothing is expected of you and everything is available to you. This stillness is not passive, it is receptive. It listens for what cannot be heard in daylight and feels what is ignored during the noise of noon. The mind, freshly stirred from sleep, is raw and unguarded. In this liminal space, truth approaches more gently, and in the absence of external noise, the inner world begins to rise. Memories you've buried, fears you've suppressed, hopes you've forgotten, they have all waited for a moment when you are not too busy or distracted to notice. Stillness becomes the meeting place where they arrive one by one, not to accuse or overwhelm you, but to be acknowledged. You do not need to fix them or even understand them. You need only to let them sit with you for a while. In the dark hours, stillness becomes a form of courage. It is easier to run to something, to flick on a screen, replay a worry, or numb the discomfort, but it is braver to remain, to let the silence surround you, to see what your soul brings to the surface when you stop trying to steer it. This is not the stillness of resignation, but of attention, a holy kind of waiting, not waiting for yourself to come home. There, in the quiet, with no one watching and no task pressing, you meet the purest form of presence. And sometimes that is the very thing you needed, but did not know how to ask for. There are few moments in life when the soul has the courage to speak plainly, and fewer still when we are quiet enough to hear it. Between 3 and 5 in the morning, something unusual happens to the human mind. Its defenses have not yet returned, and its rehearsed lines have fallen silent. It is in these hours that we are most likely to confront what we have carefully evaded during the day. The questions that hover at the edge of our minds, too tender, too terrifying, or too heavy to carry with us into the bustle of ordinary life, step forward with unsettling calm. They do not demand answers, they simply insist on being heard. To ask deeper questions in the earliest hours is not an intellectual exercise, it is a spiritual one. These are not the kind of questions that yield to logic or offer clean answers. They are more like mirrors than puzzles, reflecting back parts of ourselves we often pretend are not there. What am I running from? Why do I feel this ache when everything around me seems fine? What am I doing with my time? And does any of it lead me closer to what I truly desire? The quiet allows such questions to rise because it no longer shields us from our own hearts. In the absence of noise, the soul tells the truth. During the day, we rarely sit with these thoughts long enough to understand them. We swat them away like insects, hoping distraction will drown them out. But the darkness of early morning has a different tone. There is no audience here, no deadline to meet, no image to maintain. You are not answering these questions for anyone but yourself. And perhaps that is why they land with such weight, because they are finally being addressed honestly. When we ask without pretense, we are more likely to receive what we were truly seeking, even if the answer is not immediate. The danger lies not in asking too much, but in asking too little. We tend to circle our lives with shallow assessments and surface-level goals, rarely pausing to consider the foundation beneath it all. But in these hours, the foundation is all that remains. The facade crumbles, and what's left is the structure you've built in secret, the convictions that guide you, the fears that bind you, and the hopes you've hidden even from yourself. This is where real transformation begins. Not in the performance of change, but in the brutal clarity of what must change. To ask the deeper questions is not an act of despair, it is an act of reverence. It means you still believe there is more, that you are not content to drift, that you hunger for something solid to stand on. It is not weakness to question, it is proof of life, of depth, of a soul that has not gone silent. The early morning gives room for this kind of inquiry, not because it has answers waiting, but because it holds a rare kind of safety. No one interrupts, nothing pressures. Time itself seems to pause and wait for you to gather your thoughts. There are those who never stop to ask what matters most. They move from task to task, year to year, mistaking motion for meaning. But those who dare to ask the deeper questions in the silence, these are the ones who wake up not just in body, but in spirit. They are not seeking a perfect plan or an easy fix. They are seeking alignment. They want their lives to make sense from the inside out. And it is in these fragile hours, with no script and no applause, that the first step toward that kind of life often begins. With a question that finally finds the courage to be asked. There is a particular kind of honesty that arrives only when the world is dark and quiet. Between 3 and 5 in the morning, when everything external seems suspended in stillness, the boundaries between what you pretend to be and who you truly are become painfully thin. It is in this hour that the soul begins to stir in ways it refuses to during the noise and movement of the day. And in that stirring, a subtle but powerful desire awakens, the need to reconnect with the divine, not through performance or ritual, but through raw, wordless presence. It is not about having all the answers, nor even about having the right words. It is about being open enough to let something holy come close. Most people think of connection with the divine as something formal, a structured prayer, a place of worship, a sacred book read at a scheduled hour. And yet, some of the deepest spiritual moments come in the dark, when your heart is heavy, your mind is quiet, and your body is too tired to pretend. When all the masks fall away, and the only thing left is a fragile whisper from within that says, "I need help," or "Are you there?" These are not polished prayers. They are the cries of the soul unguarded. They do not follow the rules, but they are real. And perhaps, in the eyes of the eternal, that is the only thing that matters. To pray or meditate in this hour is not to perform. It is to present yourself as you are, confused, restless, hurting, grateful, afraid, hopeful. It is to sit in the presence of something greater than yourself without needing to impress it. There is no audience, no applause, and no expectation of perfection. Just you, breathing in the dark, letting your spirit stretch toward the light. For some, that light feels personal, a divine presence that watches, listens, and loves. For others, it may be more abstract, a sense of peace, of being held, of belonging to something vast and meaningful. But whatever form it takes, the connection is real, and it reshapes you in quiet ways. In these hours, you are not rushing to be heard. You are not trying to force clarity. You are simply showing up, and there is something sacred in that act alone. Showing up with your questions, your brokenness, your gratitude, your longing. Showing up not because you have something to say, but because you sense that something is waiting to be said to you. You may not hear a voice, you may not receive a vision, but often the peace that follows, the clarity that grows slowly over days, or the courage that returns to you unannounced, that is the answer, that is the miracle. There is a depth to spiritual connection that cannot be reached in the midst of noise. It requires stillness. It requires surrender, not the kind that gives up, but the kind that opens up. When you choose to lean into that space during the early hours, you begin to reorient your inner life. You remember that you are not alone, not aimless, not forgotten. You remember that there is something in you that longs for meaning, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet companionship of a presence that cannot be seen, only known. The world will wake soon enough, with its demands and expectations, but in this brief and holy space, there is no pressure to be anything other than what you are, and from that raw, unfiltered place, the most authentic connection can begin, not because you are worthy, but because you are willing to stop, to listen, to feel, and to reach for something beyond yourself. And often that reach is met not with spectacle, but with presence, not with answers, but with peace. There is something deeply overlooked in the way we speak about growth, especially spiritual or emotional growth. We tend to imagine it as something that occurs on stages or in structured hours, in moments where everything aligns and the path becomes suddenly clear. But true growth rarely announces itself. More often than not, it arrives quietly in the hidden corners of life, and especially in the vulnerable, unscripted hours of early morning. Between 3 and 5, when the world still sleeps and silence rules the room, the soul finds space to expand, not through control, but through surrender. Surrender is a word often misunderstood. Many think it means weakness, giving up, or falling apart. But in truth, surrender is a kind of strength few are willing to practice. It means to stop clinging to what is no longer serving you, even if you're afraid of what comes next. It means to stop pretending you're fine when you're unraveling inside. It means to stop holding your breath, waiting for everything to be perfect before you begin to live. And at its deepest level, it means placing your trust in something larger than your own understanding, even when that trust costs you your sense of certainty. These early hours often bring us face to face with the illusion that we are in control of everything. It is at night when our anxieties become louder, our regrets sharper, and our fears more persuasive. But it is also in these hours that we're most likely to realize how little we can truly control and how much we've exhausted ourselves trying. This realization isn't meant to break us, because when you stop trying to grip every outcome with white knuckles, you begin to discover a more enduring kind of strength. The strength to accept what is and to begin again from where you are. Surrender does not mean passivity. It doesn't mean you stop striving or desiring or doing. It means that you do these things with open hands instead of clenched fists. It means you can dream and build and plan without being crushed when life turns another way. The early morning is an invitation to practice this kind of surrender, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet decision, to breathe instead of worry, to release instead of resist, to listen instead of argue with what is. These are small choices, made in silence, but they shape the entire course of your inner life. There is also something sacred about surrendering in the dark when no one sees it. You're not performing for anyone. You're not announcing your breakthrough. You're simply sitting with your reality and choosing not to fight it. You're choosing for a moment to trust that something is holding you together, even when everything else feels uncertain. And somehow, that choice begins to reshape you, not by making the fear disappear, but by making you stronger than it. The kind of growth that happens through surrender is not flashy. It does not seek validation. It does not need to be measured to be real. It is the quiet expansion of the soul that happens when you stop running, stop explaining, stop striving, and simply allow yourself to exist fully in the moment. These are not wasted hours. They are foundational ones. They are the spaces where your inner life deepens, where your spirit begins to stretch out into the vastness it was made for. And when the world finally wakes and you move back into the rhythm of your day, something in you is different. Not because something was solved, but because something was surrendered. So then, if you find yourself awake in those strange, tender hours between 3 and 5 in the morning, do not rush to escape them. Do not curse the clock or fear the silence. Consider instead that you have been gently called, not by accident, not as punishment, but as invitation. An invitation to meet yourself, to meet the divine, to listen to what the noise of the day has buried. These hours are not interruptions to your sleep, they are awakenings of your spirit. Within them is space to breathe, to reflect, to ask, to feel, and to surrender. What you do in that sacred stillness will not always be seen by others, but it will shape who you are when the light returns. This is not wasted time. It is a secret place where the soul grows in the dark.